Am I amplified? Good morning. Good to see all of you for our class in the Gospel of Matthew. Just making some notes. We're going to do some reading this morning. I'd outlined what the sections would be, and then I left that paper at home. So whatever I wrote it on, it's at the house, so I've just quickly jotted down some more. But we're in chapter 10, and I need 4 readers. If you'd like to read, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll give you an assignment. Anybody? All right, Janie, you can have 16, Matthew 10, 16 to 23. And then who wants to read 24 to 31? Anybody? All right, I see a hand there, Shannon, and I saw another hand over here for another. Okay, Steve. Shannon, you've got 24 to 31. Steve, you've got 32 to 36. And then 37 all the way through the Gospel of John. Who take? Okay, 37 to 42. We'll shorten it a little bit. Anybody? I can read it. I just figured you get tired of hearing me. Okay, Larry will wrap us up with 37 to 42, Matthew chapter 10. We're going to be backing up a little bit from where we were last week to get the context for this morning's discussion. So let's start off with 16 to 23, Matthew chapter 10. Glad to have everybody here. Glad to have everybody online, wherever you're watching from. Just glad you're with us this morning. All right, let's read.
Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to carts and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you're to say, for you are to say. What you are to say will be given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly, I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes.
Not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows.
So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace on you, but I have not come to bring peace but sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household.
He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life will lose it. And he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. He who receives you receives me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever in the disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, truly I say to you, he shall not lose his reward.
All right, thank you all very much. We've just finished reading the 10th chapter of Matthew, and this is where Jesus sends out the 12 with power over unclean spirits and demons and sicknesses. And he says he's sending them out how in verse 16? Sheep among wolves. How promising does that sound? Doesn't sound very promising, does it? Unless, of course, the sheep have some secret weapons. What would the secret weapons be of the sheep? And this is just to provoke some thought. I would think, number one, what's a sheep's first line of defense? What's that? Oh, his horns. You're talking about a ram. Well, there's only a few of them that are rams. I'm thinking of the shepherd. So you're thinking in the concrete, I'm thinking in the abstract. Because he's an engineer, you know. That's what engineers do. I'm a weirdo, so I think in the abstract. A sheep's number one line of defense is the shepherd. Sheep are going out, and Jesus, the good shepherd, and you would think, wait a minute, he's a good shepherd. How would the good shepherd send his sheep out as sheep among the wolves unless the shepherd knows he's going with them? So this is what they are doing. And what's the Great Commission about? Go where? Go into all the world. You see the parallel? We're supposed to go into all the world. Jesus didn't say, go into the places where it's safe for you to go as a Christian and preach the gospel. He said, go to all the world. He's telling these guys, I'm sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves. And then he tells them how to beware of men, because what are they going to do? You're going to be beaten. Where are you going to be beaten? You remember from last week? In the synagogue. What was the synagogue? Among other things, it was a place where the Jews gathered to worship. And so where the Jews worship God, they're going to gather you in and they're going to beat you because they're going to think you're heretics for preaching this gospel of the kingdom. What are they going to say when they're arrested? Whatever the Spirit gives them to say. Now that would be great for us. I'm just going to go downtown and I'm going to start talking, and I know whatever I say downtown when I preach this gospel down on the street, it's going to be whatever the Lord gives me to say. Does that work today? Not the same. I mean, I've got a few things from the Spirit right here that I could say if I wanted to learn these things, but that's the deal. You got to learn things and you got to figure out how you want to say them. God is not promising today that when you go out, I'm going to miraculously give you something to say that's going to be the perfect thing to say. We have to figure that out. And sometimes that holds us back, doesn't it? Because, well, I don't know the perfect thing to say. Should that hold us back? As long as we say it in love, always say it in love, speaking the truth in love, as Paul would write. And he's just mirroring what Jesus did all through the Gospels. Here's something that encourages me. I believe that when I hit the streets with the Word of God on my lips, I'm going to be talking to people who know that there is a right and there is a wrong. And I'm going to be looking for people whom God has, in His providence, prepared to hear something. Now, I might have to get through 10 or 12 people to get to the one who's ready. But what happens in the process of going to the 10 or 12 people, if I'm not inspired of the Spirit, what am I doing while I'm talking to people who aren't prepared to get to the one who is prepared? What's that? You're sharpening yourself. You're practicing. When you banter with people about truth, in a positive way, with a godly spirit, with love in your heart, you're learning how to reason with people about truth. These guys didn't have to worry about that, but you and I, we need to be concerned that we prepare ourselves to reason about truth. And you can do it. And even if you don't do it very well, trust the power of the truth. Bring up the truth, stand for the truth, even if you don't know how to perfectly argue the truth, still stand up for the truth. Bud?
I think back to my days when I was a farmer.
A farmer?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a bucket and I had seed in it.
Okay.
And, you know, each time I dipped my hand in that bucket and throwed the seed out to scatter it, I didn't look at the ground. I'd already looked at the ground. It was there. But now, where the seed fell, I had no control.
Wouldn't that make a great parable?
Anyway, the thing of it is you're looking at your effort and not the results. In other words, when you look at the results, you're putting the blame on yourself. Well, if it didn't go on the right type of ground, then I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
No, well, it's going to scatter. And I've already told this story once or twice, but one day in the lunchroom when we were working on the job, I was really talking to this guy, and he seemed to be a real good prospect for sharing the gospel with. And after it was all over, it was a guy that was sitting 3 tables over from us that come up to me and said, "Do you think I could be baptized?" I said, "I'm interested in what you're saying."
Huh.
And it wasn't because I was talking real loud either, you know.
Right.
But we were just under discussion.
I don't know if everybody heard that, but he was talking about a time when he was talking with a guy at work about the gospel, thinking he was a good prospect, and the guy never obeyed the gospel, but a guy 3 tables over had been listening to their conversations and asked Bud if he thought he could be baptized. What'd you tell him? Oh, you agreed to baptize him, huh?
I was really surprised.
Yeah?
He was the most unlikely prospect that I could think of, you know.
Sometimes it's hard, it's impossible to judge.
You just got to spread the seed.
Right.
That's your job.
Exactly. When we go to Walmart and buy a plant and bring it home, we don't know if it's going to live. Well, we kind of do. But we're always hopeful. And the ones that are surviving in our house now, even though they might be the smaller percentage, I'm glad we got them. Somebody taught you the gospel. You are the smaller percentage. And I think sometimes we get too wrapped up in how many. It's never about how many. What's it about? It's about fulfilling what God wants us to do. Go to the world, preach the gospel to the world. Let the gospel flow freely from you in every opportunity you have. And like Bud is saying, is the same thing Jesus said, just spread the seed. That's your responsibility, that's mine, and that was theirs. He sent them out to spread the word about the kingdom of heaven, and that's what they did, even though they knew there were dangers involved. Verse 21, brother will betray brother to death, and father his child. Children will rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. You'll be hated by all. Why? Why will they be hated by all in verse 22? Because of my name. For the sake of Jesus Christ, he told them, you'll be hated. He's about to say the same thing about you and me and everybody else that follows him. If they've called the Lord of the house Beelzebub, don't you think they're going to say the same thing about his followers? Are you aware that people hate you because you believe in Jesus Christ? They're making it pretty plain. It just seems to be more and more obvious. And some of that's depending on where you look. A lot of people that appreciate you because of who you are as well. But Jesus is warning them, as we need to be warned about those who do not appreciate who and what we are. And yet he says, don't hold back. Go out, preach. He says, whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next, for truly I say to you, you'll not finish going through the cities of Israel until what happens? Until the Son of Man comes. There's that phraseology again, Son of Man. Jesus is calling himself the Son of Man in Matthew's gospel. What does that mean? Where does it come from, most likely? Daniel chapter 7. What does Daniel see in his dream in chapter 7 that includes an image of one like the Son of Man? He's dreaming of the Ancient of Days, who is God the Father, and who comes before the Ancient of Days, but someone in the clouds, like a Son of Man, comes before the Ancient of Days. What happens when the Son of Man comes before the Ancient of Days? What's he given? He's given a kingdom and power and glory. This is all Daniel chapter 7, just a few verses there in the interpretation of his dream. And so Jesus comes referring to himself as the Son of Man, the one who's going to come in his kingdom. I believe that's what he's saying with that phraseology. And he's talking about, you're not going to go through and finish getting the gospel preached in all these towns until the kingdom is established. And the kingdom would be established shortly after his resurrection. 50 days to be precise. Feast of Pentecost. Well, that's 50 days after the crucifixion rather than the resurrection, but still. You see what I'm talking about? See what he's talking about. The kingdom is shortly to be established. He doesn't say, now, in about 2,000 years, I'm going to come back and I'm going to set up a kingdom on the earth. And no. He says, the Son of Man, you're going to see it come shortly. He'll say that again later in this gospel. Verse 24, disciples not above his teacher, slave above his master. Whatever they did to Jesus, they'll do to us. That's what he's warning them about, and we should take a warning from that as well. But he says not to be afraid of them in verse 26. There's nothing concealed that will not be revealed or hidden that will not be known. What's that all about? What's that about the concealing and the revealing? With regard to somebody persecuting God's people, as far as God's concerned, nothing happens in secret. If you're one of his and you're persecuted, if you're maligned, if you're spoken evil of, it's going to be brought out in the open. Judgment Day is coming in a very real sense, and you'll be vindicated of everything you've been accused of. And those who have persecuted you, they will face their crimes. Everything's going to be brought to light. What I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light, and what you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim upon the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the what? The body. Here's another place where the scriptures delineate between the body and the soul and the spirit. They are three different things. And Jesus says, don't worry about those that kill your body. Who should we fear? Yes, that's the one to stand in reverence of, to stand in awe of. That's the one to obey. He's the one with the authority. And then he says this. I really appreciate what he says in verse 29. 2 sparrows are sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. This is a wonderful time of year if you like birds, because they seem really active right now. Look out the back glass, and they're just all over the backyard, in the trees, in the grass, flitting around. They're just beautiful little things. And when you think about this, God in heaven literally knows about each one of those birds. Driving down the highway, and one of those poor little things flies out in front of your car, and you smash it to pieces. Say, yep, Lord knows. You're not in trouble, by the way, I don't think, but the Lord knows what happened to that bird, so he knows what happens to me. You're more valuable, he says, than many sparrows. Verse 32. What's going to happen if you confess Jesus? Have you ever thought about your name being mentioned in heaven? Being mentioned by Jesus, before the Father as hearing him say, she's one of my people. She's one of my servants. She's been faithful, Lord. To his Father, he would say that. Your name. That guy, he's hanging in there. That's the encouragement that Jesus has given his apostles. And it's encouragement that he's given to us. But then there's the warning. Whoever denies me before men, I'll deny him before my Father. What would make us deny Jesus? What would be the possible temptation to do what Peter did? Fear. That's it. Fear. What are we willing to sacrifice? I find that it helps to think about this beforehand so that you're not caught off guard. Our garage is really dark at night. We've got a kitchen that goes, or a door that goes from the kitchen out into the garage. And I open that door, and especially if there are no lights turned on in the kitchen, it's just a blackness. And so I always have to decide, I need to go over and get that. I know where it is, but it's dark out there. Should I turn on the light? Yes, thank you. I always reach around a corner and I turn on the light. Now, I don't think there's any monsters out there. I don't think there's any ghosts or evil spirits. But there are things that I may have left out that could be tripped over. There are things that I might bump into that I forgot that I put there. So it just makes sense. Turn on the light. Jesus is the light. And when we come to him, everything is exposed. That's part of why he said earlier, everything that is done in secret, it's going to be brought to light. He is the light. He is the exposer. So in our lives, we need to bring everything to the light. And that's what these guys are going out to do, to preach the kingdom of heaven and to shine a light in the darkness. Verse 34, he says, don't think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. Now, wait a minute. Is that a contradiction in what's going to be said later about peace that passes understanding? What is this about peace and a sword? Somebody tell me about that. When did God make war historically? When did God either fight or send his people to fight? Only when there were people who had rejected God's way and had come to be doing evil. That's the only time God went to war. He didn't just say randomly, I don't care for those people. I think I'll go make war on them. I think I'll send my people. No. You go all the way back to the thing that God told Abram in Genesis chapter 15. This is Genesis 15. He's telling Abram, I'm going to send your people into the land of Canaan in 400 years. I'm not going to send them right now because, remember what he said? The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So by the time Israel would go into the land of Canaan, they weren't making war against some poor defenseless people who had no idea what was going on. They were going to be making war and conquering people and throwing people out whose cup of iniquity they had filled up with all kinds of evil practices. God never makes war without a need for war. And when Jesus says, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword, he's talking about the need to take the truth and address the lies that are being lived out in humanity. Were any lies being lived out in Judaism? Why else would his servants be beaten in the synagogues? When a man comes among you and preaches the same thing the prophets have always preached and fulfills the prophecies of the prophets and heals your sick, gives sight to the blind, casts out demons, when he raises the dead, I think that guy's somebody to listen to, if not by virtue of the fact that he's preaching the Word of God, by virtue of the fact that it's through the power of God that he does all those things. But so many were so set in their ways, they didn't want those things to change, and so they rejected Jesus. He came to his own, and his own received him not, John would later write. So Jesus is saying, I came to bring a sword. Things are messed up, and the only way to fix it is with confrontation. I don't care for confrontation. I don't know about you. Some people feed on it, not me. But sometimes circumstances call for confrontation. And when they do, you better step up to the plate. Prior to World War II, a lot of politicians were looking over at Europe and saying, that's their business. We don't need to get into that. You know when they had said that previously? World War I. And finally they said, you know what? They're sinking our ships too. We better get over there and do something about this. And we went over, helped fight a war. Same thing happened in World War II. We stayed out. And finally the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we go, whoa, we're not ready for war. We didn't think we were going to get into this. No, you better be thinking you need to get into this. And there are Christians who are just like that. I know that the Bible says preach the gospel. Well, I'm going to pray for those who are preaching the gospel because I'm not going to do it. That's somebody else's job. Somebody else who's got that gift. I don't have the gift of talking to people about Jesus. Listen, if you've got enough skill to explain why you don't have the gift to talk to people about Jesus, think about it. You've got enough skill to talk to people about Jesus. And who better to talk about? And what better message to bring to the world? But the devil doesn't want us to be willing to confront the evil that exists in the world. The devil wants us to cower back. He really wants us to be sheep. Jesus says, I'm sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves, but he didn't tell them to act like sheep. He said, you be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. But when you go out, you preach the gospel of the kingdom, and that gospel of the kingdom is powerful. And the devil knows it. He doesn't want it preached. So he's against everyone who does it. Then he says this, verse 35, and notice how it is set in your text, because it is a quote. I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his household. And then he says, he who loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. So how can you be worthy of Jesus in this context? Think about what he's saying. You put him first. That's what he's saying right here. You don't have to be really good, really special. You don't have to be really talented or skilled. If in your mind and heart you put Jesus first and you say, I've got decisions to make here. Which way should I go? This is the way I think Jesus would lead me. Well, if that's the way Jesus would lead me, that's the way I'm going. That's how you put Jesus first. And that's how you become worthy of Jesus in this context. That's what he's saying. There is a way to be worthy. Are we ever truly worthy? Well, we're sinners. Even though we don't want to sin, we still sin. So we might ask ourselves, and the devil doesn't want you to ever think you're worthy, but Jesus says, you put me first, you're worthy of me. That's what he's telling us. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. How do you take up your cross? What does that mean anyway? What was a cross for? What was the purpose of a cross? What's the purpose of an electric chair? Execution, somebody dies in an electric chair. What's the purpose of a gallows? Somebody dies on the gallows. What's the purpose of a cross? Somebody dies on the cross. When Jesus said, you take up your cross, he says, I want you to die to yourself and live for me. And unless we die to ourselves, we can't live for him. If you love your mom, your dad more than Jesus, you're not worthy of him. You love your kids more than you love Jesus, you're not worthy of him. You love your own life more than you love Jesus, you're not worthy of him. But what does he do for you if you love him more than all else? He gives you your life back 100-fold. That's what Jesus can do and does do. Nobody else can do that. Nothing else can do that. We pursue things in life that we think will give us pleasure and fulfillment, and we find out it doesn't work. The only way to find true fulfillment is to live your life according to what God teaches us through his Son. That's what we're being taught. And that's the reality of human existence. He who has found his life, you're going to lose it. He who has lost his life for my sake, that's the one who will find it. What kind of life? If we think of following Jesus as dull and boring, if we think of spending time with God as something just not very interesting, we're not thinking things through. Every one of these programs you watch on TV that takes you to some exotic place with mountains and jungles and down into the ocean to explore caves everywhere, all of that stuff has a creator, and it was all created by God. That's what God has created with this physical world, and this physical world is fallen, and we look at those things and go, wow, sure would like to go there. I hope you enjoy being here right now, but if I were to ask, wouldn't you like to be in Tahiti? Anybody here not want to go to Tahiti? Okay, we got one. What's that? Is that in Texas? Well, somewhere in Texas, there's probably a town named Tahiti. But there's all kinds of marvelous places to go and beautiful things to see and wonderful things to do. And we watch TV. Oh, yeah, I'd like to do that. There's nothing you can see or experience in this life that compares with being in the presence of God. God's the author of all of that. He's the one who made you and me so that we can be thrilled and excited about great things like that. And so when we're in his presence, and I'm not talking about the same kind of thrills and excitement that come simply from the physical body. I'm talking about fulfillment and excitement and being truly alive that comes from being out of this body and in the presence of God. Not being held back by the flesh, because the flesh holds us back. And Jesus is saying, you want to have life? Give it up for me and I'll make sure you've got life. Jesus said, I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Harold?
I think in the past we've kind of looked at life and said, well, there are some people that have skills to be evangelists, and some have skills to be benevolent people, and some have skills to be Bible class teachers, and so we've kind of isolated, I think, in a way that says people that talk to Jesus Christ, unless you got that gift, you probably don't fool with it. But I think when you get to be my age and look back at it, you say, boy, I wish I could have done better in that particular skill than I did.
Right.
And so what do I do? Well, as long as life is not over, I've got tomorrow maybe.
Right.
And see what you're making in class, I think the point you're making is really strong. We ought to try to reach out. Maybe we can't talk to people down the block or around the corner. We can talk to the family.
Sure.
Our grandchildren, those are so important. When your time comes and you're over, you'll wish you had it. I think that's really important.
Well, what if we live the rest of our life like that, saying, well, it's not my gift? Marty, it's time to take out the trash. Now, Debbie never says that, but I tell myself that. Time to take out the trash. Well, it's not my gift. You know, yeah, it is easy to say. That's not suited for me. I'm suited for something higher and better and nobler. Yeah, your car needs to be washed. It's coming around in September, and I wash my car every September, whether it needs it or not. And so it's time. Well, that's not my gift. You need a shower. Oh, that's not my gift. I mean, how far could you take this? Just anything you don't want to do, we decide, well, that's not my gift. How many things have you learned to do because you need to do this? I've learned to cook because when I was single, I needed to know how to make some things. And then I found out, this comes in really handy. No, I'm not gifted at it. You ask my children. They'll say, I wish Dad wouldn't cook. But I can feed you, Bob.
Dying to ourselves. Jesus' whole life was a reflection of that, but specifically there in the garden, he said, not my will, but yours.
Right.
And that's what we have to give up. Yeah, I'd like to go to Tahiti, but what would I do in Tahiti?
Right.
How am I going to serve him and profess his name and be an example to others in Tahiti? Could happen.
There's probably some lost people in Tahiti.
Why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it because you want to do it? Or are you doing it so that you can serve him?
Right. Who do you really want to serve in going to Tahiti? I'm starting to think, a mission trip to Tahiti wouldn't be that bad. They're just as deserving of the gospel as any place else. It's in the world. But that's the key. We have to give up ourselves. And what is the will of God in this? And so when Jesus sends these guys out, if they would ask themselves, well, what is the will of my master as he sends me out? Well, the will of my master is for me to preach the gospel of the kingdom in spite of the fact that he's told me I'm going to be resisted. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be beaten. My own parents are going to be against me. My own children are going to be against me. The people I know and love in my society and my culture are going to be against me. But he sends me out anyway. And he says, if I confess him before men, even though the men don't want me to confess him, he is going to confess me before the Father. It all depends on where we want our accolades to come from. I know that's not proper English, but you know what it means. Do you want to have God's praise and acceptance, or do we want to have men's praise and acceptance? That's the choice we have to make all the time. And Jesus is letting us know where we need to stand. The last part of chapter 40, he says this: those who receive you, there's a light. Someone will receive us. Receives me. He who receives me receives him who sent me, the Father. And he who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. Whoever, in the name of a disciple, gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, truly I say to you, he shall not lose his reward. What is Jesus telling us about God? God is looking on, and he sees every move we make towards him. You remember what Paul said in Athens? This is Acts chapter 17. We'll go there and bring our class to its conclusion. We'll end the study in Matthew's gospel in Acts. That's all right, I guess. Acts 17, verse 24. The God who made the world and all things in it. See, he's talking about what we were talking about a while ago. When you look at the world and you see all the wonderful things in the world, Paul says, I'm talking about that God, the one who actually made everything. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. He is not served by human hands as though he needed anything. That's what the Greeks and Romans did. They would take sacrifices to their God because they knew, these gods, they need this stuff that we're sacrificing. If we don't sacrifice this, the gods will go hungry and they'll be upset with it. That's how twisted the sacrificial system became in the minds of people by this time. There were always sacrifices. Who were the first two to offer sacrifices in the Bible? Cain and Abel. Sacrificing is old, but God didn't need their sacrifices. They needed to make the sacrifices. That's how you get your mind right. You're willing to give up what you've got to God because you realize, oh, that came from God, and giving it back to Him is going to show Him how much I trust Him, and my trust in Him means He's going to reciprocate. You don't do it for the reciprocation. You do it because you love God. You respect God. You honor God, but God honors honor. But by the time it got down to these guys, it was a completely different thought process. There's not anything God has ever taught us that man is not twisted. And that's what Paul is addressing here. Verse 26, He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. Well, there goes evolution out the window. Having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for Him and find Him, though He's not far from each one of us. You see, you think about what He's saying here and what Jesus has said. Somebody who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet, somebody who just gives a drink of cold water to one of these little ones, he's not going to lose his reward. People groping after God. I'm not sure about these guys preaching the gospel of the kingdom, but I think they might be from God. Maybe, well, I'm going to give a cup of water. I'm going to help them out here. I'm going to welcome them into my home. I want to hear what they have to say, and then I'll pass judgment on it later. But you see, the way we are as people, if we keep our minds and our hearts open to the Lord, God wants to reward that, because that means we're seeking Him out. And Hebrews says, God rewards those who seek Him diligently. That's what faith is all about. Paul went on to say here that they would seek God if perhaps they might grope for Him and find Him, though He's not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and exist, even as some of your own poets have said, for we are also His children. Even the heathen poets knew something of God. And it's in Him that we live and move and breathe. He's never off at a distance. He's always right here. And so when Jesus sent these guys out, that was a truth that I think gave them great courage and great comfort. And it's the same truth that should give courage and comfort to you and me today. We go out with the word of the gospel on our lips, He's going to be right there. The sheep stay near the shepherd, they're going to be the safest. Harold?
Always till the end of the earth.
Absolutely. When He commissioned us to go to the earth, He said, I'm going with you. I'm going with you. And He put His Spirit in us, and everywhere we go, His Spirit goes with us. So I think I know to me, these are very encouraging words as I go out in the world today. Anybody got anything as we close? Observations, comments, questions? Anybody? All right, that's the 10th chapter of Matthew. Lord willing, when we come back, we'll get into the 11th. Perfect timing. How about that?